Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I figure what better way to start the new year with a B22 film in the dock. When I first heard about this movie last year, I'm not going to say I was super excited for it, but I was very looking forward to this movie. And I'll say this here too. The Western genre is not my favorite genre at all, but I will say though that as time has gone by, especially last year, I'm actually becoming more and more a fan of the genre. Still not my favorite by any means, but it's one that I'm slowly coming to look into more and more along the way. And in fact, I actually had a conversation with the writer and director of the film and Brad Beman on my show, You Were So Cool with Rob Medina, the second time around. Well, we had discussed about the movie Honor Among Thieves, which is a film that he said it was one of the most difficult shoots he's ever had and one of his least favorite movies too. But I do remember at the time that when I first came across that movie, Honor Among Thieves, I was very hesitant about that film because, again, the Western genre is not my favorite by any means. And I'll also be honest too, because it's a low budget film. I just did not know how the film was going to turn out. I didn't think I was going to like it, to be completely frank. When I saw the movie, I was genuinely surprised to find out how much I really did enjoy the film and how much I actually liked the movie. It's actually a film I've gone back to watch on more than one occasion from time to time. And then another film that he had done in the Western genre is Buckskin. That is easily one of my favorite films he's ever done. It's one of his best movies he's ever done as well, too. There's just so much that I can get into about the film, which I've already done a review for. If you haven't checked that out, I recommend you guys do so. But we also discussed about that film as well, too, about what the process was like for making that movie, the purposes of what he was trying to convey in the film along the way, too. So, there was a point where he talked about how he was not wanting to do a Western genre for a while. And then previous to that conversation we had on my show, he had just finished shooting The Bounty Man. I actually saw that film, and the movie's already available right now. It came out last year. It's not a film that I'm going to say that I did not like. I did enjoy the film. There are actually quite a few things I did like about the movie, but it's not one of my favorites he's ever done by any means. It's in comparison to a lot of his other great work, this is just okay. But it's still a film that I did like a lot of aspects about it. But for me, the okayness, if you will, was just outweighed the great quality the movie did have in there as well. So I was actually kind of surprised to learn that he was going to be doing another Western genre film because he had said he was going to hold off on that for quite some time. And then later on that year, here he is shooting a Western genre film in the dock. So when I saw the trailer to this movie, I was genuinely surprised in how good that film really looked. In fact, I actually sent a message to Brett and told him, hey, I think this movie looks really, really good. And he said, thank you. And then later on, I had a chance to watch the movie. And I can genuinely say that this is easily one of my favorite films he's done that's in his filmography. Now, it's not in my top 5, but it's definitely for sure in my top 10, like easily in the upper ranks, if you will. And if there's a movie that's going to start off B22 in 2023, I hope it's this film. I hope this is the film that comes out first, at least a lasting impression for people to walk away from of what they just saw with this movie that they expect with other films coming down the pipeline here. Because as I said before, this is easily one of my favorite films he's done because there's a lot of great qualities in this movie that I'm going to say this right now up front, that this film is in a lot of ways is more or less a return to form for him, because the last film that had the same type of impressions that I felt about this movie was Andromeda. Because when I saw Andromeda last year, which is available right now, you guys can actually check it on this platform called Xumo, which is for free. So if you haven't heard it, I recommend you download it, check it out, and you can check out that movie Andromeda on there. But when I saw that film, I was floored with that movie, like how good it was, because that film for me was like the return to form of what Brett Beman does his absolute best at when it comes to the internal struggles that characters are going through when dealing with family members and various other things with that as well too. When you look at a movie like the Rodeo Thief, 90 Feet from Home, Buckskin, and now this movie here too, there's a lot of great qualities that I think the showcase of what his strengths are, because it definitely does add on, I think, some of the areas that I think he does really good when it comes to writing and directing. Even a movie like, for example, like Bull Shark, although that is in a lot of ways definitely a genre film, but it's not. I'm not gonna say it's not his strongest movies. I'm gonna say I will say that it's not his strongest film, but there are great, strong qualities about that movie that really kept me invested with the story, with the performances of everybody in that film, and the subject matter that we're dealing with in that respective movie. But in this film, on the other hand, you definitely get to see a lot more depth when it comes to the character of Doc Holliday, played by the wonderful Tom Zimbro. So, I can literally, as you can tell right now, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but there's a lot that I can go about this film that I definitely will get into here. But because the movie hasn't been released as of yet, because this movie is expected to be released sometime in the spring through Xumo, because this is going to be a Xumo original like the other film, Andromeda, which is also available on that Xumo platform. So I would highly recommend you guys follow B22 on their social media accounts where they'll make announcements when the film will be released. But this is going to be coming out as a Xumo original sometime, hopefully later this spring. So I will be talking about a lot of the movie, but won't get into any spoilers because, again, the film hasn't been released yet. So I'll get into my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. Doc Holliday runs a small dental practice in rural Georgia when he is visited by a young Wyatt Earp and offered a job hunting down the infamous Bridle brothers. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive of the film is with the performance under Tom Zimbro, who plays Doc Holliday in this movie. You know what's funny for me is that I always feel like that some of Tom Zimbro's performance in B22 films, I should say, happen to be in the Western genre. The film Buckskin, I pointed out before that I think is easily Tom Zimbro's best performance he's ever done by far, in my opinion. I think he's done a lot of movies too that I've come across that he's great in, but that movie, in my opinion, is I think he does his absolute best. And then another movie I think he's so good in is a movie called The Bounty Men, which is where he plays a villain in that movie. I thought he was killer in that part. I really loved his performance in that movie. This film, I think, is possibly, if not his second best performance, easily probably his third best performance. There's another film he did called Whitetail, which I thought he was great in that movie too. But what the reason I'm pointing this out as easily one of his best performances is because you get to see a lot of range when it comes to his the character he portrays in Doc Holliday, because you get to see early on in the beginning of the movie that he's running a dentist practice where he's clearly somebody who has a lot of people have a lot of respect for him in terms of as a man, as far as him running the practice is concerned. But then you learn right away that this is also a man who causes a lot of trouble too, that he puts himself in these trouble situations, yet he's the same guy that can pull himself out of them as well too. So he's someone who's very resourceful at what he's able to do to get himself in trouble and then get himself out of trouble as well. So you can see that this guy has a reputation of being more or less like a tough guy. And I think Tom Zimbro, although when you look at him, he's not someone you can look at and say, oh, this guy's physically a threat, but his persona, when you learn of what he's capable of pulling off here, especially by surprise, because most people look at him and think this guy is a weakling here, but when you see what he's able to pull off, it instantly has an impact on you and makes you think twice about wanting to, more or less get in the ring with him. So I think that Tom does a really good job in showcasing a lot of the physical aspects of what the character of Doc Holliday pulls off in this movie, and he does it very effectively and very convincingly as well too. But the other thing that I'm going to point out about his performance in this movie really do have to do with more or less the emotional scenes that are in this film, and there's actually quite a few of them, but there's two in particular that comes to mind right now that I'm going to say right now are my favorite parts of the entire film. And this is a film that I enjoyed from start to finish, but two specific sequences in this movie are my absolute favorite, because Tom Zimbro is one of those actors that you learn if you watch his movies, or films that he's in, I should say, you really get to see like how good he can be. If given a small little part, he could have an effect on you to some degree where you realize that this is the guy that if you give him the job, he's going to get the job done quickly. But when you give him an opportunity to expand on his acting arsenal, if you will, he can do some wonders when it comes to what he's able to pull off in delivering the performance and doing the scene justice. And two particular scenes, in my opinion, that I think are my absolute favorite of this entire film have to do with a conversation that he has with his girlfriend in this movie, where he opens up to her and shares his pretty much his vulnerability and why he drinks and what he's trying to do. He's trying to figure out what is the purpose of him feeling these emotions, if you will, that he's going through, and dealing with the loss of his brother, among other things as well. And those particular sequences in the film, in my opinion, really does the character justice, because when you come to find out the type of guy that he is early on in the film, that this guy's a troublemaker, I'm not going to say that that's a persona that he's putting on. It definitely is Doc Holliday, but you can tell that it's, in a lot of ways, it's going to sound kind of strange for me to say this here, but it's kind of a distraction where the man that you see behind closed doors isn't really the same guy that you see out in the public, if you will. that guy is someone who's just going through the motions, having and using drinking and alcohol, and where he becomes an alcoholic pretty much, as a way to deal with these problems, or in a lot of ways to avoid dealing with these problems, and then having to deal with the world around him as well. So it's kind of a weird dichotomy about his handling on certain situations, but when you see him behind closed doors, that's where the real person comes out. And the way that Tom transitions from more or less the public persona to the private person, if you will, it's handled quite beautifully. And that's not a very easy thing to do. And this is coming from a guy who's not an actor, so I'm not trying to come off as if though I know what I'm talking about in terms of how hard it is, but I do know for a fact that to be able to see how someone is able to deliver more or less kind of like this, I'm not going to say goofy aspect of his character, but really more about this certain carelessness about that he has about himself. And then behind closed doors, even though he's still in a lot of ways still very careless, but he's opening up and he's talking to somebody to be able to find a way to cope with his issues that he's dealing with internally, and having to find a way to deal with that on a frequent basis here, and to have his girlfriend to listen to him and hear him out and provide some insight, give him some advice, and you get to see how he's be able to handle that along the way. That's actually quite a brilliant stuff that I see. And the writing under Brett Bellman with the dialogue there as well, and the directing as well too, the cinematography with Jeff Ham. There's just a lot of great qualities for me that comes out of those particular sequences, with everyone else involved to get those scenes done correctly, or not correctly, I meant to say done very well, I should say. And then having Tom deliver that to give it that final, what's the best way I can say it? That proper, I wouldn't say closure, but just having a proper, effect on you. That's the word I want to use. Have that proper effect on you, I think, is masterful in my opinion. And when you have a group of people who know what they're doing, and if you give them the opportunity to do it to their full capacity here, you're going to see some genuinely wonderful stuff. And those two sequences in that particular film, for me personally, were some of the absolute best that I think Brett and everyone else involved have done in terms of what I've seen in their filmography up to this point. But the overall film in itself is fantastic. But I mean, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but when it comes to Tom's performance in those sequences, in my opinion, I think he does one of his absolute best performances, in my opinion. The other thing I want to point out too is when it comes to some of the other characters that you come across in this movie. I will say right now that when I had heard that Derek Redford was cast as Wyatt Earp, I'll be frank, I wasn't really keen on that idea. I was actually quite hesitant about it, because in my mind, the character of Wyatt Earp, I meant to say, is someone that I envision as being like this manly man. And I'm not to sound disrespectful towards Derek, because I don't mean to come across that way, but I'm thinking of like Kurt Russell in Tombstone, or even Kevin Costner in the film Wyatt Earp, where he plays Wyatt Earp. There's a certain quality of that character that I think of, where you look at them and you think of a square jaw, broad shoulders type of a guy. So looking at Derek, that's not what I think of right away. But what I actually will say is that his performance won me over. I still don't see him as that physical, man that I think of as Wyatt Earp, but he definitely got the essence of the characters. As the story progresses along the way, his performance won me over, where I got to see the like it's a lot like Tom Zimbro, where you look at the guy, you don't think of him as a physical man, but right away this is a guy that is able to handle his shit. He's the guy that can get the job done. And although you don't get to see a lot of that with the character of Wyatt Earp in this movie, but he's a guy, as you start to listen to him talk and how he's trying to establish and set more or less the tone of what to be expecting in getting the job done here, among other things as well too. I think that was what really started winning me over, where I get to see, okay, I can see that sense of confidence that this is a guy that you understand why he's in the position that he's in right now, where he's able to go out and look for people to keep up with him and his brother along the way when it comes to them looking for the bounties, if you will. So that slowly started winning me over when it came to his performance. So I got to give a lot of credit to Derek in that respect, because honestly, I wasn't really so keen on the idea, but again, as the story progresses, it actually won me over. So kudos to you, Derek, because I think you did a really good job. One other thing I want to point out here too is with Robert Keith, because he's in this movie. Robert Keith is one of these actors that I will say that he's phenomenal when it comes to delivering these over-top characters that we see, like, for example, in Honor Among Thieves, The Rodeo Thief, even to some degree, Buckskin, which I think is by far his absolute best performance in my opinion, alongside with Tom Zimbro's performance in that film. But with this particular movie, I love the fact that he's not playing those type of characters. He's actually playing someone much more reserved, a little bit more grounded, if you will, that is offering a counterbalance to Doc Holliday. And this guy is more or less, in a lot of ways, kind of like the guidance, if you will. His guy, I wouldn't say his guidance, but he's more kind of the guy that's just trying to keep things focused for Doc Holliday, even though he knows Doc Holliday may not listen to him. But the fact that Doc Holliday will go out of his way to visit him and trust that he can provide some information for him, and looking for the Bridle brothers here, I think that showcases of the amount of respect that he has for him to be able to maintain some sort of balance along the way, to be able to communicate with the pastor that Robert Keith plays in this movie. So I love seeing something different from what I'm used to seeing that Robert does in the various other films I've come across here, primarily with B22 films, that he does, I think, a really good job in this movie. Now, when it comes to the villains in this film, in the Bridle Brothers, Billy Blair, who's, man, that dude, whenever I see his name on the marquee, I will go out of my way to watch the films that he's in, because I think he's really that good of an actor, in my opinion. But without really getting into spoilers here, him and the other actor that plays the other Bridle brother, whose name escapes, which I'm sure I'll have you guys the image for you to see there, but there's something that he does in that movie that is quite despicable, and you don't actually see him actually doing it, but you get to see just as he was finishing, if you will. And I remember thinking that I actually appreciated that was in the film when it came to how much you're going to despise this person, because what he does is quite brutal to one individual in this film. And I remember immediately thinking right away, oh, I want this fucker dead. Like, I want this guy to get shot and killed, and I want Doc Holliday to find these brothers and murk these fools. I really had that sentiment come right out of me. And a lot of it does have to do with the writing with Brett and the directing as well too, but just those little subtle things along the way about how in this case Billy's character is someone that is very careless for other people's well-being, and then just nonchalant about it after the fact as well. And I actually thought that worked quite well in those terms here, to be able to get you, as at least for me, for hopefully with everyone else as well too, to immediately know that this guy is not a good person, and that you want him to meet what he gets coming to him. So I actually thought that was established pretty well when you get more or less introduced to the brothers here in this movie. So I give a lot of kudos to Billy Blair for playing this despicable character, because I think he did a really good job. And what's also great too about Billy is that, in a lot of B22 films, he's kind of more or less the funny guy, if you will. This time around, he's not playing that type of a character. He's actually pretty much playing more or less a much more grounded character in these terms here. But I think he did a really good job in this movie, and I really do hope that people will take away from what he's been able to do in the more subtle things, for you to really hate the guy and then want the bad guy, want the good guy to come out on top, if you will. So what else can I point out here too? The action sequences in this movie. I'm going to point this out first before I get to the action here. The directing this movie with Brett that he has done with this film, it's easily one of my favorite films that he's directed here so far, because when it comes to some of the more the other genre of films he's done, I hope this doesn't come out the wrong, but they're not his best directed movies. But when it came to this film, it's easily one of my favorites he's ever shot, because the way that he sets up the camera angles here, and the way you get these wide shots of the horses running through, or where Doc Holliday is chasing the Bridle brothers, and the shootout sequences, and the way all those stuff are set up here, knowing that they didn't have a lot of time, and obviously didn't have a lot of money, but for it to come out as good as it does in the final cut here, I got to give a lot of credit to everyone involved in putting all those pieces together, because they've done a really good job. So when it came to the action sequences of this movie, they actually were quite impactful, in my opinion. Now, they're not. I'm not going to point out and say that this is one of the best I've ever seen. It's not that. It's just that. I hate to come off like this, but I'm just going to say it. For what they were able to pull off here with the little they had, I do think they've done a really good job. So this is one of the situations where when you look at in the film, and I think if they had more time, this could have been a lot better. So that's why I hope it didn't come off the wrong way. But if they had much more time and more money, more resources, I can only imagine the things that could have actually pulled off here in a much grander scale, because with the very little that we do get in this movie in terms of some of the action sequences, they did that quite well. Just imagine what they could have done with a bigger budget here. I just thought it would have turned out some phenomenal stuff here, in my opinion. But as far as everything else is concerned with the positive, I mean, the overall story, as I mentioned, the plot numbers, it's not that hard to follow. It's pretty straightforward in that sense, but this is very much a very character-driven story. And I took away more from that than the overall story in itself, if that makes any sense. So for me right now, that's going to be the end of my positives. So now let's get into my negatives. One of my main negatives with the movie, I'm going to say it has to do with this. It's, I mentioned before that I love, in this case, my two favorite scenes in the movie between Doc Holliday and his girlfriend, so that conversation they had with each other. I felt like those were easily the best scenes in the movie. Everything else about the film is fantastic. Don't get me wrong. It really is good. But the reason why I'm pointing that out here is because when you have those moments in the movie, that's when you get to learn more about the character of Doc Holliday, and to some degree, his girlfriend as well, too. But then you also have other moments like that where Doc has a conversation with the pastor, played by Robert Keith, and you know right away that these guys have history. The way that they're talking with each other, the way they were reacting to each other, and how they trust each other along the way too. And I actually wanted more out of that particular, with those scenes, with those characters, because there's just so much more that I felt like could have been added there to be able to expand on it a little bit further, to really have certain things sink in the way that Doc Holliday and his girlfriend had in those two respective scenes that I was referring to here, where you really get to know them as individuals. You get to know Doc Holliday more. I wanted more of that with some other characters along the way too. In this case, let's say with the pastor and Doc Holliday, because once at least for me, once I had a taste of that, I felt like there was so much more we could have gotten with other characters along the way too. Even with the Bryder brothers, when you get to learn more about their background and for their motivations for why they're doing what they're doing, I wanted much more of that as well too. So I'll be frank, if it wasn't for those two scenes that I absolutely loved in that movie, I don't know. I still would think the movie would still be good. I think it would still be great, I should say. But I don't know if that would be considered as a negative, because at that point, once you had a taste of that, I wanted more of that, where you have moments of these characters where they share the bit of their background, and then like that is cut off and you got to move to the next beat. Where when you had those scenes with Doc Holliday and his girlfriend, you had the time with those characters to really let that sink in much better than certain other sequences where you have more or less kind of those one-on-one conversations, but it didn't sink in as much as it did with the two previous scenes I was referring to here. So that's only one negative that comes to mind here, but that's not to take away from the movie. It's still very much a good film in that sense, but because I had a taste of that, I wanted more. The other thing I'm going to point out too, is with the action sequences. Now, I pointed out earlier that with what they were able to pull off here, it did turn out well, because it did turn out well. But I never really felt fully satisfied with some of the action sequences that we get in this movie, because as good as they have turned out here, to me, the issue that I had was that the limitations there, because you could tell there's a lot more that could be done, but due to the limitations, I never felt like it really could live up to its full potential. But again, despite the fact that it turned out quite good, I felt like that was where it hurt the action sequence. The limitations were that hindered that full satisfaction, if you will, of really getting a really great action sequences, because you get to see that building up to it, but it doesn't really live up to those I hate to say like this, to those expectations, but I think it's the best way I can describe it here for me. But apart from that, that's going to be then my negative. So now let's get into my rating. I really did enjoy this movie a great deal. And when I remember I saw the film for the first time, I was actually really impressed with what I got here, because the one thing I'm going to say here too, I remember I had a conversation with Brett, I think it was the first time around, that if given more time, more money, more resources, for the Western genre, that if he's ever going to direct another one, which he ended up doing here, I felt like that he can really showcase what he can do here. And I felt like in this movie, he didn't confirm it for me, but I'm just making the assumption that a little bit more time, a little bit more money, a little bit more resources, it showed in that film. I mean, you got to see what he's really capable of pulling off here if given the opportunity to expand on those areas that were limited in Honor Among Thieves, to some degree, I would say, with Buckskin. And even especially with Bountyman, which I said before, I mean, I liked the film. I didn't enjoy as much, but it was an okay movie. But that, even though the story was rather good, but there was some real limitations that movie had that I felt like hindered the full potential that movie could have offered here. This movie, in my opinion, exceeds all those expectations as far as like being able to showcase what he's able to pull off here with the Western genre, which is a genre that he didn't grow up loving, and turns out to be one of his best films he's done in I would say in the last year or so, alongside with Andromeda here. So there's definitely a lot that he's been able to do with this movie to really showcase what he's really capable of pulling off here. And I'm really excited to see the next Western film he's doing called The Killing of Billy the Kid. I recently been able to post up some shots of the film on social media, and they look quite good. And I'm hoping that film is as good as this movie, if not better. So for me, as far as the doc's concerned, I'm going to give this movie a solid cheers. And those are my thoughts on the film. Now, as I've already mentioned before, that this movie is expected to be released sometime in the spring as a Xumo original on the platform Xumo, which you can check the film out for free when it gets released on there, along with Andromeda, which is also released on Xumo as a Xumo original, which I highly recommend you guys do check out if you haven't done so already. But when this film does get released, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the NRW, share, like the videos, and also hit the notification bell while you're down there as well. And also, make sure you follow NRW on social media, on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. And you can follow me on my social media accounts on Instagram and Twitter, Mr. Rob Medina, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And I have a show on the channel called You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and I have social media for the show as well. On Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM. And I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful week, and have a great 2023 as well. And until next time, stay safe out there, and cheers.